The meeting room inside the Galactic Concordat station was large enough to hold a small city. The walls curved upward like the inside of a shell, and the air was thick with the smells of 60 different species. Some of them breathed nitrogen. Some breathed a mix of gases that would kill a human in seconds. The ventilation system worked very hard to keep everyone alive and in the same room at the same time. Magistrate Venn stood at the center podium. He had 7 limbs, 4 eyes, and more political experience than most civilizations had years. He had guided the Concordat through border disputes, resource wars, and 3 near-extinction events. He was not easily frightened. But today, his hands were not steady. The conflict between the Vreth Dominion and the Soral Collective has reached a critical point, he said, his translator humming softly, so every species in the room could understand him. Our projections show full-scale war beginning within 40 cycles. Billions will die. Dozens of systems will be caught in the crossfire. The room was quiet. This was not new information. Everyone already knew this. They were not quiet because of the war. They were quiet because of what Venn said next. The Sol system sits directly between the projected front lines. A low sound moved through the chamber. It was not quite a gasp. It was closer to the sound a crowd makes when someone drops something very fragile, and everyone watches it fall before it hits the ground. The humans, said Counselor Dreth of the Yan species, his 4 fingers pressing flat against the table. You are talking about the humans. Yes, said Venn. Another silence. The humans had been given provisional observer status with the Concordat 11 years ago. It was mostly a formality, a gesture of goodwill toward a young species that had just figured out basic, faster-than-light travel. The Concordat had done the same for dozens of species over the centuries. Most of them were grateful. Most of them sat quietly in observer chairs and learned how things worked and did not cause trouble. The humans had, in 11 years, filed over 200 formal complaints, challenged 4 standing trade agreements, asked to renegotiate their observer status terms twice, and once sent a single human diplomat to argue for 3 hours straight against a Concordat ruling on asteroid mining rights, a ruling that did not even affect Earth. The diplomat had won. Venn pulled up the human assessment file on the central display. The data was long. Most files for new species were short. Population count, tech level, known military assets, political structure. Sections with titles like behavioral anomalies and statistical outliers, and the one that always made Venn pause, conflict engagement patterns. See attached supplemental report. The supplemental report was 400 pages long. Their history shows a species that has never, in recorded memory, chosen to stay out of a conflict that came near their territory, said the Concordat's head analyst, a small blue-skinned creature named Piv, who spoke very fast and looked permanently stressed. They do not de-escalate when threatened. They do not retreat when outnumbered. They have a documented tendency to treat disadvantage as a reason to fight harder rather than a reason to stop fighting. That is irrational, said Dreth. Yes, said Piv. We know. They do it anyway. Venn looked at the star map on the display. The Sol system glowed like a small orange dot between 2 enormous red zones, the projected war fronts. It looked very easy to overlook. He knew better than to overlook it. We will send an envoy to Earth, he said. We will present them with a non-involvement protocol. We will ask them, politely and clearly, to stay out of this war. We will offer them compensation, trade access, technology sharing, protected status. And if they refuse, asked Dreth. Venn did not answer right away. He looked at the file again. He looked at the supplemental report. He looked at the section titled, Notable Incidents, Ambassador Reeve Confrontation, the Titan Station Dispute, the Case of the Human Mining Crew and the Vreth Border Patrol. He closed the file. Then we will ask again, he said, more politely. 40,000 kilometers above Earth, A cargo hauler called the Meridian Bell was running a standard supply route from Mars Station to the outer belt. It was not a glamorous job. The ship smelled like old coffee and machine oil. The seats were worn flat, and the autopilot had a small glitch that made it drift 2 degrees to the left every 6 hours. Cole Navarro didn't mind. He had been flying supply routes for 8 years, and he liked the quiet. He was 31 years old, originally from Tucson, Arizona, and he had the kind of calm face that made people think he wasn't paying attention when he was actually paying attention to everything. His co-pilot, Lena Park, was the opposite. She was 27, from Portland, and she talked constantly, fixed things before they broke, and had strong opinions about nearly everything. She was also the best engineer Cole had ever flown with. They were 3 hours into the route when the Concordat signal came through. It wasn't directed at them. It was a wideband broadcast, the kind the Concordat used for internal communications that were supposed to be low priority and unencrypted. Most of the time, those signals were boring logistics data. Shipping lane updates, species registry confirmations, meeting schedules. Cole had a receiver that picked them up out of habit. He had never heard anything interesting on it. Until now. The signal was fragmented. The translation matrix that came built into the receiver was basic. Good enough for common Concordat trade language. Not good enough for formal diplomatic speech. Cole got maybe 1 word in 3 clearly. But what he got was enough. Emergency session. Full council. Frontline projection. Sol system. The humans must not be involved. He stared at the receiver for a moment. Then he played it again. Lena looked up from the engineering console. "What are you doing?" "Listening to something." She rolled her chair over and listened. When it finished, she sat back and crossed her arms. "They're having a war near us," she said slowly. "And they're scared of us getting involved?" "That's what it sounds like. We're the ones who should be scared. They've got faster ships, bigger weapons, and about 50 years of technology on us, minimum." "Yeah," said Cole. Lena thought about it. "That's kind of funny, actually." "Yeah," said Cole again, but he wasn't laughing. He was already pulling up the recording software on his console. He saved the full signal, cleaned up the audio as best he could, and tagged it with the timestamp and coordinates. Then he sat back and looked out at the stars. The Vreth and the Soral were still far away. Big powers doing big things in parts of the galaxy that most humans only read about in news summaries. It was easy to feel small out here, alone in a cargo ship between planets, with nothing but empty space in every direction. But the Concordat was afraid of Earth getting involved. Cole found that very interesting. He didn't post the recording yet. He saved it, closed the console, and let Lena go back to her engineering checks. But he kept thinking about that phrase, turning it over in his mind, the way you turn over a stone to see what's living underneath it. The humans must not be involved. Outside, the stars were the same as always, cold and steady, and very far away. Cole watched them, and thought about what it meant that the biggest governing body in the known galaxy had just held an emergency meeting about a species that, as far as most of the galaxy was concerned, had barely left its own front yard. He took a long sip of cold coffee and started to smile. The Concordat envoy ship entered Earth's orbital space quietly and without announcement. It was a small vessel, smooth and pale, shaped a little like a teardrop. It docked at the ISS Resolute, Earth's primary orbital station, with the kind of careful precision that showed the pilot was very nervous and very determined not to show it. The envoy's name was Scrix. He was a Belthari, a species that looked roughly like a large beetle standing upright, with hard brown plating across his back, 6 limbs, and 2 large black eyes that could not blink. He had been in the diplomatic service for 30 years. He had negotiated with warlords, mediated food riots on dying colony worlds, and once talked a rogue AI out of destroying a moon. He was not someone who scared easily. He was scared now. Not of the humans exactly, more of the situation. He had read the briefing documents. He had read the supplemental report, all 400 pages of it. He had made notes in the margins, and most of his notes said things like, "This is not how species are supposed to behave, and this cannot be statistically accurate, and why." The docking bay of the ISS Resolute was clean and well lit. Human crew members moved around with that loose, unhurried confidence that Scrix had noticed in every piece of human footage he had ever reviewed. They were not trying to look important. They simply looked like people who were comfortable in their own space, which in Scrix's experience was actually more intimidating than people who were trying to look important. Commander Greg Adler met him at the dock. Greg was not what Scrix had expected. The briefing documents had suggested Earth would send a senior diplomat, someone smooth and careful, someone who would exchange formal greetings and guide the conversation along predictable lines. Greg was a large man from Boise, Idaho, with a square jaw, short gray hair, and the kind of handshake that made your hand remember it afterward. He was wearing a plain uniform with no decorations except a single small pin on his collar that Scrix's translation system identified as a rank insignia. Commander, United Earth Government Defense Liaison. Ambassador Scrix, Greg said, with a nod that was polite but not small. Welcome to the Resolute. We have a room set up. Can I get you anything? Water? We have a few atmospheric blends if standard air doesn't work for you. Scrix said standard air was fine. He followed Greg down a hallway that was slightly too warm for his comfort, and into a meeting room with a long table and several humans already seated around it. At the head of the table was Dr. Kate Morrow, former Army colonel, international law professor, three-time delegate to the United Nations, currently serving as Earth's lead interstellar negotiator. The file described her as highly analytical, extremely patient, and very difficult to rush. The file also noted, in a small observation that Scrix had circled twice, that she had never lost a negotiation she had entered voluntarily. She stood when he came in. She was not tall, but she carried herself like someone who had never once in her life needed height to make a point. She shook his upper right hand. She had clearly done research on Belthari greeting customs, and smiled. "Ambassador," she said, "we're glad you came in person. Please sit down." Scrix delivered the non-involvement protocol with as much formality as the setting allowed. He explained the conflict between the Vreth and the Sorrel. He explained the projected front lines. He explained that the Sol system sat in a delicate position, and that for Earth's own safety, it would be best if humanity agreed to remain neutral, limit its military activity, and sign the non-involvement protocol as presented. He placed the document, 300 pages bound in Concordat blue, on the table. Greg picked it up. He flipped to page 1, read for a moment, then kept going. He did not stop. He did not look up. He sat there for 2 hours and read the entire thing while Scrix waited and the other humans in the room drank coffee and talked quietly among themselves as if this were completely normal. When Greg finished, he put the document down, picked up a red marker, and began going through it again. He circled 14 clauses. He put question marks next to 6 more. He dog-eared 4 pages. Then, he capped the marker, slid the document across the table to Kate, and placed a sticky note on top of it that read, "We have questions." Kate picked it up without looking at the sticky note. She already knew what it said. What followed was 3 hours of the most precise and methodical legal dissection Scrix had ever witnessed in his 30-year diplomatic career. Kate went through the protocol clause by clause. She pointed out that Clause 7 restricted Earth's right to self-defense if either warring party crossed into human-adjacent space, which, given the frontline projections, was not only possible but likely. She noted that Clause 19 froze Earth's military development program for a period of not less than 30 standard years. She highlighted the subclause buried inside the appendix, Section 4, Paragraph 9, Subsection B, which granted the Concordat authority to relocate any human colony within 12 light-years of the conflict zone. "You came here," Kate said, and her voice was calm and even, "and asked us to sign away our right to defend ourselves, our right to grow, and our right to live where we choose, in our own neighborhood. I want to be very clear about what we think of that." She paused. "We've seen documents like this before. We just used to call them by different names." Scrix transmitted the meeting summary back to Magistrate Venn that evening. His report was long. He included everything: the clause-by-clause argument, Greg Adler's silent 2-hour read, Kate Morrow's final statement. He included his own observation at the end, the one that he almost deleted because it sounded too dramatic, but decided to leave in because it was accurate. "The humans smiled during the negotiation," he wrote. "Not to be polite, not out of nerves. They smiled the way a person smiles when they are not afraid of what comes next." When Venn read that line, he set the report down and was quiet for a long time. Back on Earth, Cole Navarro uploaded his intercepted recording to every major public network. By morning, it had been viewed 3 billion times. The comment sections were mostly jokes and reaction images. But the most liked comment, across every platform, in every language, said the same thing in different words. The Vreth Dominion's War Council met in a chamber carved directly into the surface of a dead moon. The walls were black stone. The lighting was red. The 12 admirals seated around the table had between them fought in over 40 wars and had never once lost a battle they planned themselves. Admiral Kavak sat at the head of the table. He was old by Vreth standards. His scales had gone from deep green to pale gray, and one of his forearms had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic after the Battle of Saren Gate. He had a mind like a precision instrument, and he did not believe in fear. He believed in data. The data on the human file was making him very uncomfortable. "Read it again," he said, pointing at his senior analyst. The analyst, a young Vreth named Gav, who had clearly not slept in several cycles, pulled up the report. "The species has been at war with itself for the majority of its recorded history," he said. "Not border skirmishes, not resource disputes. Full-scale, civilization-level conflicts, multiple times. Each conflict was followed not by decline, as standard models predict, but by rapid acceleration in technology, infrastructure, and military capability. They got better from losing wars," said one of the admirals across the table. "They got better from all of them," said Gav. "Winning and losing. The outcome did not seem to matter. What mattered was that they kept going." Kavak looked at the display. It showed a human military training simulation, a scenario his analysts had obtained from an intercepted Earth military network. The simulation was designed to be unwinnable. A defensive position, outnumbered 20-1, no resupply, no reinforcement. Standard military theory across almost every known species said the correct response was tactical retreat or managed surrender to preserve fighting strength. The human in command of the simulation was a young officer named Danny Cruz. He was 26 years old, originally from San Antonio, Texas, and he had the kind of face that looked like it was always thinking about something slightly more interesting than whatever was currently happening. Danny had not retreated. He had not surrendered. On day 1, he split his unit into 3 independent groups and gave each one a different false communication frequency so that anyone listening in would think they were 3 separate forces. On day 2, he used broken equipment from a disabled transport to build a network of pressure-triggered alarms across the access corridors. On day 3, he rerouted the base's power grid to generate false heat signatures on the enemy's sensors, making them believe the base was occupied in areas it was not. On day 7, 3 days after the simulation's AI had logged a predicted surrender, Danny launched a counteroffensive. It should not have worked. It worked because Danny had spent 6 days making the enemy think they already knew where everyone was. So when everyone moved, the enemy's whole model collapsed at once. The simulation's AI categorized the counteroffensive as tactically irrational but psychologically destabilizing. Kavach had read that line 4 times. One individual, he said, 26 years old, in a training exercise, he did this. Yes, sir, said Gav. And they produce how many like this? Gav looked at his notes. Their military produces approximately 200,000 trained officers per year across all branches. We do not have reliable data on how many operate at this level. But the simulation program that generated this scenario was specifically designed to find and promote individuals who respond well to impossible conditions. So they are actively selecting for this, said Kavach. Yes, sir. The room was quiet for a moment. Across the galaxy, in a completely different meeting, the Soral Collective's lead sociological researcher, a careful, thorough being named Sev, who had spent 12 years studying human culture, was delivering a report that had taken him 3 of those years to write. He stood in front of a Soral Intelligence Committee and spoke in a flat, academic tone, because that was the only way he could get through it. Humanity is the only known species, he said, that consistently grants its highest cultural honors, not to its rulers, not to its military victors, not to those who gain the most, but to individuals who died protecting others. Not famous others. Not important others. Strangers. People they had no biological or social obligation to protect. He paused to let that sit. They build monuments to these people. They name their children after them. They teach their young that this, choosing to stand between danger and someone weaker, at the cost of your own life, is the best thing a person can be. Not the most powerful, not the most successful, the most willing to give everything for someone who could not protect themselves. One of the committee members asked what the practical military implication of this was. Sev looked at them for a moment. An enemy that genuinely does not calculate their own survival as the primary objective is extremely difficult to model, he said. Our threat assessment systems are built on the assumption that all rational combatants will, at some point, choose self-preservation. Humans will not always make that choice. And they do not consider it irrational. He requested a transfer to a different species assignment that afternoon. He said it was for personal reasons. His supervisor approved it without asking questions because the supervisor had also read the report. Back in the Vreth War Council, Admiral Kavach closed the human file. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table, looking at the star map. The Sol system sat there between the 2 red zones, small and quiet, and very much in the way. We do not engage the humans, he said, not unless we have no other choice. And if we find ourselves in a position where we have no other choice, I want every option reviewed again before we accept that conclusion. Are we understood? 12 admirals nodded. None of them argued. On the Meridian Bell, Cole was still running supply routes, but he had started keeping a second log, a private one, separate from the standard flight records. He was writing down everything he noticed, everything he heard on the Concordat frequency band, every small thing that seemed like it might matter later. He wasn't sure why. It just felt like the kind of thing a person should do when the galaxy was watching. Not that the Vreth or the Soral used Earth's calendar. But by the time the news reached human networks, translated and time-stamped for Earth Standard Time, it landed on a Tuesday morning. And that was the detail that stuck in people's heads, because it felt mundane, and nothing about what followed was mundane at all. The first major engagement happened in the Karev system, 7 light-years from Sol. It was fast and brutal. The Vreth hit 3 Soral supply stations in a coordinated strike that lasted less than 4 hours. The Sorrel responded by destroying a Vreth forward base and 2 escort carriers. The death toll from both sides in those first hours was somewhere between 11 and 14,000. The estimates varied, because no one could agree on how many crew were aboard the stations when they went down. The Concordat issued a formal statement calling for a ceasefire. Both sides ignored it. 3 days later, a Vreth strike force appeared in the outer edge of the Sol system's gravitational neighborhood. They were not targeting Earth. They were using the asteroid belt as cover, a flanking route to get behind a Sorrel supply chain that had been running through the region. By Concordat law, the space was technically unclaimed. The Vreth commander had checked. He had filled out the correct navigation filings with the Concordat registry, listed the route as a standard military transit, and moved on. He had not told Earth. He had not asked Earth. This was a mistake. Pete Calloway was 24 years old, from Flagstaff, Arizona, and he had been running a drilling crew in the outer belt for 7 months. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He drove a mining rig the size of a small building, managed a crew of 11, and spent most of his workday covered in rock dust. He had filed his drilling coordinates with the Sol Traffic Authority 3 weeks in advance, exactly as required by law. When the Vreth cruiser dropped out of stealth 200 kilometers off his port side, Pete's first reaction was not panic. His first reaction was to check the traffic clearance board and confirm that yes, he absolutely had the right-of-way. His second reaction was to hail the Vreth ship. The Vreth captain took 6 seconds to respond, which was probably because he was trying to figure out why a mining vessel was hailing him as if this were a parking dispute. When he opened the channel and saw a dusty human in a work jacket staring at him from a small cockpit screen, he did not know what to say. Pete said it for him. "Hey, you're in my drilling zone. I've got a clearance filed with Sol Traffic Authority dated 3 weeks ago. I've got a crew on schedule and a deadline. I need you to move your ship." There was a silence. "We are a military vessel," the captain said, through a translator. "We are on active operation." "I understand that," said Pete, "and I'm on an active drilling operation. We both have places to be. Mine was scheduled first. So, if you could just move over, maybe 40 kilometers to your left from where you're sitting, that would get you out of my zone and I can get back to work." Another silence. Longer, this time. The Vreth cruiser moved 40 kilometers to the left. Pete said thanks and closed the channel. He filed an incident report before he even finished his coffee. That incident report went from Pete's supervisor to the Sol Traffic Authority to the Earth Defense Liaison Office and landed on Commander Greg Adler's desk by noon. Greg read it again, and then walked it directly to Secretary Laura Voss's office. Laura Voss was the Earth's Secretary of Defense. She was 53 years old, from Charlotte, North Carolina, and she had a reputation for being very quiet in meetings and very decisive immediately after them. She read Pete's report in full. She looked at the attached sensor logs that showed the Vreth cruiser's position, its trajectory, and the positions of at least 4 other Vreth vessels that had passed through the outer belt in the past 72 hours. She put the report down on her desk. "P, activate the Sol defense perimeter," she said. The perimeter was not something the Concordat knew about. It was not something either the Vreth or the Sorrel had in their intelligence files on Earth. It was a network of deep space sensor arrays, communication relays, and rapid response launch platforms that Earth's defense planners had been quietly assembling for 6 years. Ever since the Concordat conflict projections had started looking bad, and several very calm, very clear-eyed people in the Earth Defense Council had decided it was better to be ready than to be surprised. 6 ships came out of standby. They were not the biggest ships anyone had ever built. They were lean and fast, built for point defense and rapid positioning. And they carried enough firepower to make any serious military commander stop and think before assuming they were not a threat. They moved into position at the edge of the contested zone, not inside it, not crossing any line, just sitting exactly at the boundary, very still, very visible, broadcasting on every standard frequency in use. Laura Voss recorded the message herself. "This is Secretary Voss of the United Earth Government. You are operating near a populated human system without notification or authorization. We are not asking you to stop your war. We are informing you that if any vessel, Vreth, Sorrel, or otherwise, crosses this marker, we will treat it as an act of aggression against Earth. We will not warn you again." The Concordat emergency channel went into immediate crisis mode. Magistrate Venn called a session so fast that 3 council members joined from the wrong time zones. Both the Vreth and Sorrel delegations, mid-engagement, paused. Kavak received the human broadcast on the Vreth command channel and sat with it for 40 seconds without speaking. On the Sorrel side, the fleet admiral who had been planning the next strike ran the human deployment through every threat model available. The models kept returning the same result: insufficient data to determine whether human response was a bluff or genuine combat posture. This was the problem. No one could tell. With a known species, a military commander could look at a threat and run the numbers: odds of follow-through, likely response intensity, known tactical doctrine. But the human file kept doing this thing where the models broke down at the crucial moment, because the data on human follow-through went in the wrong direction. Humans bluffed sometimes, but they also followed through in situations where following through made no rational sense, and they did it without showing a clear external signal beforehand, which meant the bluff and the genuine threat looked identical from the outside. 6 ships. No shots fired. 1 recorded message. The war stopped. Not permanently, not officially, but in that moment, 2 of the most powerful military forces in the known galaxy were doing the same thing at the same time, staring at 6 human ships at the edge of the Sol system and asking themselves one quiet, unsettling question. Are they bluffing? No one had a confident answer. Pete Calloway had not meant to be famous. He found out about it 3 days after the standoff, when his crew chief showed him a screen with about 47 million views on it. The footage was from his own cockpit recorder, a wide shot of Pete in his dust-covered work jacket, sitting relaxed in the pilot's seat, telling a Vreth warship to move because he had paperwork. The clip was 9 seconds long. Someone had put music behind it. Pete watched it twice, handed the screen back to his crew chief, and went back to work. He had a drilling quota to hit. But the clip had already spread further than Pete knew. By the time he finished his shift, it had been translated into 47 species languages, and was running on networks across the Concordat. The Belthari news service ran it under the headline, "Human mining worker turns away warship over scheduling conflict." The Yan communication network ran a longer piece with an analysis segment, during which 2 commentators argued for 20 minutes about whether Pete's behavior was brave, irrational, or a form of psychological warfare. The 3rd commentator said it was probably just a human being a human, and that was arguably the most frightening option. In the Concordat chamber, Magistrate Venn watched the clip 3 times. Then he requested a private channel to Earth, not an official diplomatic channel, a personal one, routed through the Earth Defense Liaison Office and marked for Kate Morrow's eyes only. She responded within the hour. They met over a secure video link, then in his large curved office on the Concordat station, Kate at her desk in the Earth Government building in Geneva, a cup of tea cooling beside her keyboard. Kate looked awake, which Venn found slightly unnerving because he had given her almost no notice. Venn did not open with diplomacy. He opened with honesty, which was rare for him, and which meant the situation had gotten serious enough that performance felt pointless. "I owe you a different kind of conversation," he said. When I sent the non-involvement protocol to Earth, I believed it was a reasonable request. I believed it was for your benefit as much as ours. I want to tell you that I have since come to understand that I was not entirely honest, even with myself, about what we were afraid of. Kate nodded slowly, listening. We were afraid, Ven said, that the war would pull you in, that you would take a side, that whichever side you did not take would hold it against you, and that Earth would find itself in a conflict it was not equipped to survive. He paused. That was the fear we told ourselves. The real fear was something smaller and less comfortable. Kate said, You were afraid of what we might do to the balance. Ven looked at her for a moment. Yes. You didn't want us sitting at the table, because we don't play by the rules everyone else agreed on. You have no concept, Ven said carefully, of knowing when you are supposed to lose. Every other species in the Concordat, at some level, understands that certain situations are unwinnable. They accept limits. It is part of how the balance holds. You do not accept limits. It is not aggressive. It is not even intentional. It is simply part of how you are built, and it makes you very, very difficult to predict. Kate was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, Geneva was just beginning to come alive. The first commuters, the first lights, the city waking up the way it did every day, regardless of what was happening in the galaxy. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it as information, not as a threat. Ven said he was listening. We're not trying to scare anyone, Kate said. We're not trying to dominate anything. We're not trying to rewrite the rules just to make trouble. We come from a place where the only reason anything ever got better, the only reason any of it ever moved forward, was because somebody refused to let it stay broken. That is not a strategy. That is just who we are. It goes all the way down. She picked up her tea. The reason Pete told that warship to move was not because he was brave or irrational or running a psychological operation. It was because he had filed his paperwork, he was on schedule, and someone was in his way. He just asked them to move. That's all. Ven was quiet for a long time after she said that. Long enough that Kate glanced at the connection indicator to make sure the channel was still open. I would like to propose something, Ven said finally. Not a protocol, not a treaty, a conversation, a real one, between your negotiators and representatives from both the Vreth and Sorrel sides. Not to end the war officially. Just to begin talking about what it would cost each side to stop. Kate said she could do that. The conversations happened over the next 8 days in a temporary space aboard the ISS Resolute, which had been Greg Adler's suggestion, and which had the advantage of being on neutral ground that both sides were slightly too nervous to behave badly in. Kate led the human side. Danny Cruz, the officer from the training simulation, was brought in as a tactical consultant at the request of the Vreth delegation, who had apparently read his simulation file and wanted to understand how he thought. Danny mostly drank water and asked very simple questions in a very direct way, and both delegations kept answering them because the questions turned out to be the exact ones nobody had asked yet. Greg Adler sat in on every session. He brought sandwiches on day 3 because the catering situation had broken down and the alien delegations were not going to say anything but were clearly not eating enough, and Greg Adler did not like watching people go hungry during a negotiation. On day 8, a ceasefire framework was signed. It was not a permanent peace. It was a beginning, a structure for further talks, a set of agreed limits on where the fighting could happen, and a joint request to the Concordat for mediation support. It was fragile and imperfect, and both the Vreth and Sorrel made very clear they were signing it under protest. But they signed it. 3 weeks after the signing, something happened in the Concordat chamber that no one had planned, and several members later said they had not seen coming. 3 Concordat member species, the Belthari, the Yan, and a quiet ocean-dwelling species called the Merev, who almost never spoke in council. It was short and clearly written, and it asked for one thing: that Earth be granted full standing membership in the Galactic Concordat, effective immediately. The reasoning attached to the petition was even shorter. It said, if there is another war, and there will be, we would rather the humans stand with us than between us. The vote passed. Kate accepted the membership on behalf of Earth in a short ceremony in the Concordat chamber. She thanked the council, acknowledged the moment, and said that Earth would try to be the kind of member that made the Concordat better rather than louder. Magistrate Venn, standing beside her, said something quietly in his own language that the translator rendered as a reasonable beginning. Back in the outer belt, Cole Navarro was flying a new route, one that passed through 2 Concordat corridors that had been open to human traffic as part of the peace terms. It was a longer route, but a better one, and the cargo rates were good. Lena Park was asleep in the co-pilot seat, which she always was on long stretches, though she claimed she was just resting her eyes. Cole pulled up the original intercepted broadcast on his secondary console. He had kept the file this whole time, copied and backed up twice. He played it through the small speaker on the console, low enough not to wake Lena. The humans must not be involved. He listened to it. He thought about Pete and his paperwork. He thought about Kate in that negotiation room, calm and steady, taking apart 300 pages of diplomatic language with a red pen and 11 years of patience. He thought about Danny Cruz on day 7 of an unwinnable simulation, moving everyone at once. He thought about Laura Voss saying, "We will not warn you again," to 2 of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, with 6 ships and a voice recorder. Outside the cockpit, the stars were the same as they always were, steady and cold and very far away. But the corridors were open now. The galaxy was wider than it had been a year ago, and somewhere out in all that space, 60 species had just watched humanity do what humanity had always done: show up, refuse to leave, and somehow make things better in spite of everything. Cole smiled. He set the recording to loop, leaned back in his seat, and flew on into the dark.